Everyone stared as I pulled up to the gravel driveway, my little cabin on wheels gleaming in the late afternoon sun. It was quiet at first, too quiet. Just the soft hum of tires on stones and the whisper of wind through the pine trees. I could feel the weight of every eye in the neighborhood on me, even though I didn't see anyone yet. But I knew they were watching. I'd felt it ever since the HOA letter arrived, that first cold warning that my plans didn't fit their idea of a neighborhood. I parked near the edge of the lot, heart pounding. This wasn't just about a cabin. It was about claiming a piece of peace I'd worked years to earn. Years of scrimping and saving, of dreaming while others called me foolish, of staring at blueprints under the dim glow of a single desk lamp. And now, finally, it was real. Yet the letters from the HOA, thick, official, and threatening, gnawed at me like a constant, invisible hand. They had even said they might involve the police to enforce community rules. I took a deep breath and opened the door to my cabin, the hinges creaking like a warning. The smell of pine and fresh wood hit me instantly, a small but potent reminder that this was my dream. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp soil and autumn leaves. Every inch of that cabin told a story. The nights I spent sanding the floor until my hands bled, the mornings I glued tiny trim pieces while listening to a weathered radio, the evenings I whispered encouragements to myself like a prayer. Then I saw them, 2 patrol cars idling at the corner. The familiar hum of engines and the flash of badges made my stomach twist. My first instinct was panic. What if they wouldn't let me stay? What if this dream, so carefully nurtured, was ripped from my hands before I could even set foot inside? The HOA had already done everything they could on paper: letters, fines, threats. And now, with uniformed officers just yards away, it felt like the universe was holding its breath, waiting to see if I would crumble. I stepped out of the cabin, hands trembling slightly, and smiled nervously at the officers. I wanted to appear calm, even brave, but my pulse betrayed me. "Afternoon, officers," I said, my voice quieter than intended. Their eyes scanned me, polite but unreadable. The HOA had called them, yes, but why exactly? That question looped endlessly in my mind. Was this really about rules, or was it about fear? Fear of someone daring to live differently outside their neat little boxes. The older officer approached first. His uniform was impeccable, but there was a softness in his eyes, a hint of curiosity rather than authority. "We got a call about the cabin," he said. Simple words, but they felt like a blade at first. My stomach lurched, and then something unexpected happened. He smiled, not a fake, reassuring smile, a real one. "You built it yourself?" he asked, nodding toward the cabin. I swallowed hard. "Yes," I whispered, "every inch of it." His partner chimed in, "That's impressive." There was awe in his voice, genuine awe. I blinked, stunned. Not judgment, not annoyance, pride. My breath caught. The officers weren't here to stop me. They were here to witness me. And in that moment, every fear, every sleepless night, every letter from the HOA felt lighter. Somehow, seeing their reaction made all the anxiety and uncertainty worth it. The older officer stepped closer, peering at the wheels and the hitch. "You really planned this carefully," he said, and he wasn't just talking about engineering. He was talking about me, the long hours, the determination, the resilience it took to get here. And suddenly I realized that's what the HOA could never understand. Rules, letters, fines, they can't measure heart, effort, or courage. I laughed softly, a short, incredulous sound that surprised even me. I guess I didn't expect this," I admitted, and that was true. I had prepared for confrontation, for hostility, for even humiliation. But this unexpected kindness, this validation from strangers, it was almost overwhelming. As the officers walked around, inspecting the cabin with curiosity rather than suspicion, I felt a strange shift inside me. Fear began to dissolve into pride. My hands stopped shaking, my chest loosened. And in that moment, the dream no longer felt fragile. It felt alive, real, unstoppable. But even as I smiled, I knew the real test hadn't yet begun. The HOA's letters were still there, waiting, a storm gathering just beyond the tree line. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter with the officers was only the opening act of a story far bigger than me, far more complicated than anyone expected. Something about their reactions, the warmth, the surprise, the unspoken respect, hinted at a deeper truth that I couldn't yet see. And I knew, deep down, that the coming days would challenge every ounce of my courage. Because sometimes, the world surprises you not by tearing you down, but by quietly showing you the strength you already had. The next morning, I woke to an uneasy quiet. the kind that presses against your chest and whispers that the world is waiting for you to falter. I stepped outside my cabin, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and immediately felt the tension thrumming through the neighborhood. Mailboxes, perfectly lined fences, and manicured lawns stretched out like a silent jury, judging every inch of my little home on wheels. I could almost hear their thoughts. Who does she think she is? I wasn't sure if I had the courage to face them, but I knew there was no turning back. Every screw I'd tightened, every plank I'd sanded, every lonely night spent imagining this moment had led me here. And yet my heart betrayed me, beating too fast, too loud, echoing in my skull like a warning drum. Then I saw the first sign of confrontation. A cluster of HOA members had gathered near the end of the street, eyes narrowed, arms crossed, whispering among themselves. I could feel the weight of their judgment even from a distance. The letters, the warnings, they were just the beginning. Their stares were sharper, more personal. They weren't concerned with rules anymore, they were concerned with me. I swallowed hard and reminded myself, this is my dream, I'd earned it. But as I watched them, doubt crept in. What if this neighborhood, this carefully curated paradise, really didn't have room for someone like me? What if all the effort, all the nights alone with blueprints and sawdust, ended here, on the edge of a gravel driveway, under the harsh scrutiny of people who would never understand? The sound of engines cut through my spiraling thoughts. My stomach tightened. Police cars again, but this time they weren't just idling at the corner. They were moving slowly down the street, lights off, casual but deliberate. My chest twisted. Had the HOA called them again, my mind raced through every possible scenario. Fines, arrest, orders to leave. The officers stopped beside me, getting out of their cars with the kind of calm certainty that comes from knowing exactly how to handle tense situations. But instead of authority, their expressions carried curiosity, concern, even encouragement. I blinked, caught off guard. In a world ready to judge, they were something else entirely, human. "You're here early," the older officer said, and his voice had a warmth that somehow grounded me. "We just wanted to make sure everything's okay." Everything's okay? I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. After weeks of anxiety, legal letters, and whispers from neighbors, the tension eased, just a little. As we stood there, a new figure approached from the cluster of HOA members. It was the president, clipboard in hand, lips pressed tight. I could see the effort to remain composed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of panic, a hint that she hadn't expected to find me standing there, calm, proud, and unyielding. We don't think this cabin complies with our regulations," she said, voice trembling slightly. And then she paused, as if realizing the absurdity of the confrontation she had orchestrated. "It's unusual." I took a slow breath. "Yes," I said softly, "it's different, but it's mine." The words weren't loud, but they carried every ounce of defiance, every lonely night of work, every moment of hope that had brought me here. And in that quiet moment, something shifted. The officers nodded slightly, subtle but unmistakable approval. They weren't here to enforce rules, they were here to witness courage. But the president wasn't finished. She glanced at the other HOA members, then back at me, searching for weakness. We might have to involve the authorities," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. I could see the conflict inside her, an unspoken question. Is this about rules or fear? The officers exchanged a glance, and then something extraordinary happened. The younger one stepped forward. "Honestly," he said, "I don't see a problem. The cabin's safe. She's clearly put in a lot of work. Why would anyone have an issue with that?" His words hung in the air, simple, factual, but powerful enough to crack the tension. For the first time since arriving, I felt a spark of hope ignite. It was fragile, delicate, but real. And as I looked around, I realized that maybe this wasn't just a battle with the HOA. Maybe it was a test of resilience, a measure of how far I was willing to go to claim what was mine. I swallowed, feeling the weight of every judgment, every letter, every whispered comment. And yet, beneath it all, a quiet certainty grew. No letter, no threat, no fear could erase the truth I held in my hands. The truth of my hard work, my determination, and the dream I had built from scratch. Sometimes the world shows you who it really is, not through obstacles, but through unexpected allies. And in that fleeting morning light, with officers by my side and the HOA hesitant, wavering, I realized that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands silently, unwavering, letting the world see that courage has already won. The afternoon sun hit my cabin at just the right angle, casting long shadows across the gravel like warning flags. I could feel the eyes of the neighborhood on me again, sharper this time. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was anticipation. They were waiting to see if I'd crack, if the weight of their disapproval would finally make me falter. I gripped the edge of the cabin door, knuckles white, and wondered if courage could really hold against a tide of doubt and judgment. Then came the sound that made my stomach drop, the HOA president's voice, raised, not quite yelling, but sharp enough to cut through the calm. "We've had complaints," she said, marching toward me, clipboard in hand like a shield. "About your presence here, about this structure. You can't just—" Her words stopped when she noticed the police officers standing beside me. I caught the glint of surprise in her eyes, a fleeting hesitation that spoke volumes. She had expected compliance, maybe tears, maybe excuses. Instead, she found quiet defiance, a steady pulse of certainty radiating from me, backed by uniformed officers who weren't there to enforce her will but to witness mine. "Everything's in order," the older officer said calmly. "We've checked the cabin, it's safe. No violations that concern us." His tone was final, but it carried more than authority. It carried trust, respect, a validation that felt almost sacred. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease just a fraction. But the HOA president wasn't done. "This isn't just about safety," she said. "It's about the look of the neighborhood. The rules exist for a reason." Her gaze swept over me, flicked to the officers, then back to me. There was a crack in her composure now, a subtle tremor betraying that she wasn't entirely certain she could enforce this confrontation without consequences. I took a step forward. "I followed every regulation I could find," I said quietly, deliberately making sure my voice didn't waver. "I built this cabin myself. It's safe. It's mine, and I won't let fear or judgment take that away." My words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of years, of every lonely night, every obstacle, every small victory that had led me here. For a moment, silence fell. The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind, which had whispered threats yesterday, carried only the soft rustle of leaves today. I felt something shift in that stillness, a subtle acknowledgement that courage could not be ignored. Then came the murmurs from the cluster of neighbors gathered across the street. Some whispered in doubt, others in fascination. I realized with a jolt that this wasn't just about the HOA anymore. It was about perception, about showing a community that determination could stand its ground against fear and conformity. The younger officer stepped closer, tilting his head thoughtfully. "Sometimes," he said almost to himself, "people confuse difference with danger, but it's not the same. This is proof of hard work and commitment. That's not a problem, that's remarkable." His words sank into me like sunlight breaking through clouds. Remarkable. I had never thought of my effort that way. To the HOA, my cabin was an inconvenience, a disruption. But to someone impartial, someone who could see beyond the rules, it was a testament. And that realization, fragile as it was, sparked a flicker of hope I hadn't expected to feel today. The HOA president's jaw tightened, and for a split second I saw something in her eyes, doubt. Perhaps she realized that rules alone could not suppress determination. Perhaps she sensed that her authority had limits when confronted with unyielding courage. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The words she had prepared, threats, fines, ultimatums, suddenly seemed inadequate. I felt a strange clarity wash over me. This confrontation, this battle of wills, wasn't just about a cabin. It was about proving to myself that fear and judgment, no matter how persistent, could be met with calm, steady resolve. The officers' presence had transformed the dynamic, but even without them, I had learned that my determination carried its own weight. And yet I couldn't ignore the nagging tension in the air. The HOA wasn't defeated, not yet. There were whispers of meetings, of letters, of escalations I couldn't predict. The storm hadn't passed, it had only shifted. My heart quickened as I realized this was the calm before something bigger, something that would test not just my resolve, but the limits of patience, creativity, and courage. I glanced at my cabin, its wooden walls warm with afternoon light. Every inch of it told a story, every scratch and groove a testament to perseverance. And I understood fully that this was more than a structure. It was a symbol of resilience, of quiet defiance, of hope carved from sweat and solitude. Sometimes, I realized, the world doesn't teach lessons through comfort or compliance. It tests you through opposition. And the true measure of courage is not in winning every battle, but in standing tall when the outcome is uncertain, when fear whispers in your ear and judgment glares from every direction. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. The neighborhood, the HOA, the whispers of disapproval, they were still there. But so was I, and for the first time I felt the stirrings of something powerful, the realization that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply endures. Rain began to fall that evening, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the roof of my cabin like a relentless heartbeat. I watched the droplets streak down the windows, blurring the neat rows of lawns beyond into a watercolor of gray and green. The neighborhood looked quiet, almost serene, but I knew better. I could feel the undercurrent of resistance, the silent judgment lurking behind every shuttered window. I had just finished unpacking the last of my tools when the knock came. Not urgent, not threatening, just deliberate. I opened the door to find the HOA president, umbrella dripping, clipboard clutched tightly. Her eyes darted around my cabin like she was trying to memorize every detail before she spoke. We received more complaints," she said, voice clipped but laced with hesitation. "About the cabin, about the property line, we might have to escalate this." My chest tightened. Escalate. The word felt like ice in my veins. I had anticipated letters, maybe tense conversations, but escalation carried a different weight. It implied authority. It implied confrontation. And yet, looking at her, at the rain clinging to her hair, the subtle tremor in her hands, I saw uncertainty behind the rigidity. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was grappling with the realization that maybe her fight wasn't entirely justified. I took a deep breath. "I've done everything I could to follow regulations," I said, voice steady despite the storm outside and the storm brewing inside me. "This cabin is safe. It's mine. I won't let fear dictate my right to live here." My words weren't a challenge. They were a declaration, a quiet proof that determination has its own authority. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped. The rain fell harder, drumming on the roof, on the windows, on the driveway. The officer's presence earlier came to mind, their quiet support like a protective shield. I wondered if they would have stood here with me now, or if this moment would have been mine alone. But the thought didn't weaken me. Instead, it reminded me that courage often comes unaccompanied. That sometimes you face opposition not with backup, but with conviction, with belief in your own work and the truth it represents. I stepped aside, letting her glance around the cabin. I noticed the brief flicker of admiration, or perhaps surprise, hidden behind her professional composure. She wasn't ready to admit it, not yet. But even acknowledgement in silence was a crack in the wall of opposition. The next knock came moments later. I hesitated, then opened the door again, and there stood a neighbor I had only seen from a distance before. He was tall, wiry, and carried the kind of quiet confidence that made people take notice without saying a word. "I heard about the cabin," he said simply. "I wanted to see it for myself." There was no judgment in his eyes, only curiosity. I nodded, gesturing for him to come in. The warmth of the cabin contrasted with the chill of the rain outside, the smell of fresh wood and pine filling the space. He walked slowly, inspecting every corner, every detail. I could feel the tension in his gaze ease, the corners of his mouth turning up ever so slightly. "You built this yourself?" he asked, awe in his voice. I nodded again, feeling a strange mixture of pride and relief. And then in the quiet between us, I realized something important. Resistance can't always hold against authenticity. The HOA might issue letters, neighbors might whisper, and rules may attempt to define your boundaries. But there's an undeniable power in creating something real, something tangible, something that carries your effort, your story, your soul. The rain softened outside, and I felt the weight of the day lifting just a little. I glanced at the HOA president standing near the doorway, her clipboard now lowered, her stance less rigid. The storm wasn't over, not by far. But in that moment I sensed a subtle shift. A recognition, unspoken, that perhaps some things cannot be policed, cannot be legislated, cannot be erased with authority alone. I thought about the officers again, about their simple acts of witnessing, about the quiet acknowledgement that had bolstered me when doubt threatened to consume me. Courage, I realized, often requires no grand gestures, just the resolve to keep standing, even when the world expects you to falter. As night fell and the rain turned to a gentle drizzle, I stepped outside for a moment, letting the cool air wash over me. The neighborhood was quiet, the shadows long, but the feeling of being seen, of being validated, lingered. I understood that my battle was far from over, that the letters and whispers and judgments would return. But I also understood that I had already won something intangible, something permanent. The knowledge that determination, once set in motion, is difficult to extinguish. And sometimes, I realized, the world teaches you its lessons not through compliance, but through the quiet victories you claim when no one is watching. The next morning, the air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth and tension. I had barely started my coffee when I noticed the bright flash of a new notice pinned to my cabin door. My heart sank. Another letter, another demand, but this one was different. This one carried a sense of finality I hadn't felt before. The HOA had escalated matters. They were serious now, hinting at legal action, fines, even the possibility of towing my cabin. I ran my hands through my hair, staring at the words on the page. Fear tried to creep in, the kind of fear that makes you question every choice, every step, every ounce of courage you've mustered, but I forced it back. I reminded myself I had come too far to let paper and ink dictate my reality. I had built more than a cabin. I had built a life, a dream, and no threat could erase that. By mid-morning, I heard the low hum of engines approaching. My stomach tightened as 2 police cars rolled down the street, lights off, moving slowly. The officers from before stepped out, calm, measured, familiar faces in an increasingly hostile world. Relief surged through me, but so did apprehension. Their presence had been a shield once. Could it protect me now against the full force of an HOA determined to push boundaries? The HOA president was already there, clipboard in hand, her expression tight with frustration. "We've asked you multiple times. This structure violates neighborhood guidelines," she said sharply, her voice trying to carry authority but faltering under the gaze of the officers. "You're risking fines. You're risking legal action." I stood tall, looking at the cabin I had poured myself into. Every scratch, every groove, every plank spoke of patience, grit, and determination. "This cabin is safe. It's within the property lines. I've followed every regulation I could find," I said, my voice steady. "And I will not let fear take this from me." Her eyes narrowed, and I sensed the shift in the crowd that had gathered, neighbors peeking from behind curtains or hovering near their fences. Some eyes were skeptical, others curious, but all were fixed on the standoff unfolding before them. I felt the weight of their judgment, but also a strange thrill. This was no longer just about me. This was about standing up, about showing what persistence looks like when confronted by doubt and authority. The older officer stepped forward. "We've reviewed the cabin. There's no immediate violation that we can enforce. From a safety perspective, it's sound. From our perspective, it belongs to its owner." His words were simple, factual, and yet they carried an undeniable weight. The HOA president's lips pressed into a thin line. She couldn't argue with facts, not this time. Then the unexpected happened. Another neighbor, a woman I had waved to but never really spoken with, stepped forward. She carried a small notebook, scribbled notes in hand. "I live nearby," she said, voice trembling slightly, "and I just wanted to say, seeing someone put their heart and effort into something so real, it's inspiring. Maybe rules aren't always the measure of value." Her words were quiet, but they resonated like a bell through the tension. I felt a lump form in my throat. Courage, I realized, often spreads quietly. One act, one stance, can ripple outward, shaking even the most rigid walls of judgment. The officers exchanged a glance, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them that this confrontation had already been won, not with threats or authority, but with quiet, unwavering resolve. The HOA president's hands tightened around her clipboard. She looked around, realizing that the opposition wasn't just me anymore. Support had begun to ripple through the community, subtle but undeniable. Whispers of admiration, of curiosity, of tentative approval floated through the crowd. She faltered. The power she thought she wielded was slipping. In that moment, I understood something profound. Fear and authority can be loud, imposing, even intimidating. But authenticity, courage, and perseverance have a weight of their own. They can't be measured by letters, fines, or regulations. They are impervious to judgment when grounded in truth and effort. The rain had stopped, leaving a glistening sheen on the driveway. Sunlight peeked through the clouds, casting the cabin in a warm, golden glow. I stepped forward, letting the light fall across the walls I had built with my own hands. I didn't feel victorious yet. The HOA could still try to challenge me. But I felt something deeper, a quiet certainty that no matter what came next, I had proven something important to myself, to the officers, to the neighbors watching from a distance. Sometimes the world tests you not by what it can take from you, but by how deeply you believe in what you already have. And standing there, surrounded by tension, authority, and the unspoken judgment of a community, I felt the first true flicker of peace. Because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands, quiet, unwavering, and unshakable. Night fell like a heavy curtain, and with it came the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes every sound, every creak of the cabin, every rustle of leaves feel amplified. I couldn't sleep. The events of the day replayed in my mind like a storm of whispers, judgments, and unspoken questions. The HOA's letters, the stares of neighbors, the presence of the officers, they had all shifted the battlefield, but the war was far from over. A sudden knock at the door made me jump, heart-hammering. My stomach twisted. Who could it be at this hour? I peeked through the window and froze. It wasn't the HOA president. It wasn't a neighbor. It was one of the officers, flashlight in hand, his uniform glinting faintly in the porch light. "We wanted to check in," he said quietly. "Make sure everything's okay." I swallowed hard. Relief and apprehension collided inside me. Their presence was a comfort, yes, but it reminded me that the HOA's influence still loomed large, that their determination to challenge me hadn't vanished. I think so," I managed. I need to make sure I can hold my ground." He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I could say. "Sometimes standing firm isn't just about rules or laws," he said. "It's about proving to yourself that you won't back down, and you've done that." His words lingered, heavy and grounding, as if the night itself had leaned closer to listen. The next morning I awoke to a scene that made my heart sink. A group of HOA members had gathered at the entrance to the street, murmuring amongst themselves, papers clutched tightly, phones in hand. The tension was palpable. It wasn't just letters anymore. It wasn't just whispers. They were mobilizing, preparing for a confrontation I hadn't yet imagined in full. I stepped outside, feeling the chill of dawn on my skin. The cabin behind me glowed softly in the morning light, its presence a quiet, stubborn declaration. The officers arrived, as always, their calm demeanor a lifeline in a storm of anticipation. But even with them there, I could feel the weight of judgment pressing in from every side. The HOA president approached, clipboard raised like a shield. "This is your final warning," she said, voice strained but attempting authority. "We will be documenting this. You must comply with our directives." Her words felt heavy but hollow. I had prepared for confrontation. I had prepared for resistance. But what I hadn't anticipated was the quiet, simmering fear in her eyes, a flicker that betrayed her uncertainty. I stood my ground. "I've followed the rules to the best of my ability. This cabin is safe and it is mine. I will not let fear or judgment take this away." My words rang out over the quiet street, each syllable carrying the weight of years of effort, hope, and persistence. Then something extraordinary happened. One by one, neighbors began to emerge from behind hedges, driveways, even open windows. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to admiration and finally to quiet solidarity. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was a testament, a ripple of support that began to encircle me, invisible but undeniable. The officers exchanged a glance, and I saw in their eyes a quiet approval, a recognition that the tide had shifted. Authority and intimidation could attempt to bend the world, but authenticity, courage, and relentless determination had begun to carve a path that no one could block. The HOA president's hands trembled slightly, clipboard now forgotten at her side. The murmurs of her members faltered, voices softening, doubt creeping in. Her power, carefully constructed over letters, meetings, and rules, was unraveling, not because she lacked control, but because determination and courage had a gravity she could not compete with. I felt a warmth spread through me, the kind that comes from standing firmly in the truth of your own effort. The cabin wasn't just a structure anymore. It wasn't just wood and screws, nails and planks. It was a symbol of resilience, of quiet defiance, of hope that refused to be silenced. And in that moment I understood something profound. The world will always test you. It will throw letters, judgments, threats, and doubt. But there is a power in persistence, in standing firm when every force around you seems intent on pulling you down. Courage isn't loud, it isn't brash, it isn't always celebrated, but it is steady, unyielding, true. As the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow across the cabin and the street, I felt a deep sense of calm settle over me. The battle was not entirely over. There would still be letters, meetings, whispers. But I had proven something that could not be undone. That determination, effort, and courage carry a weight of their own, a weight that even authority cannot ignore. Sometimes the hardest victories are not the loudest. They are quiet, stubborn, and deeply human. And as I stood there, the cabin behind me glowing softly in the morning light, I realized I had already won something far greater than compliance. I had claimed my space, my dream, and my truth. The evening air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and pine, thick and almost electric. I could hear the distant murmur of neighbors gathering, some lingering on sidewalks, others peeking cautiously from behind curtains. I knew they were watching, waiting to see if the confrontation from the morning would spiral, or if I would hold my ground. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the raw intensity of the moment. This wasn't just about a cabin anymore. It was about what it represented: courage, persistence, and the quiet rebellion of claiming space in a world that constantly questions your right to exist. The HOA president arrived first, her footsteps sharp against the gravel, clipboard clutched like armor. This has gone too far," she said, voice strained, lips pressed tight. There was anger there, yes, but also something else, unease. I could see it in her eyes, a flicker of doubt, of uncertainty. The officers were already present, standing just behind me, silent but unmistakably supportive. Their presence was steadying, but it was my resolve, my quiet determination that would carry the day. "I've done everything I can to follow the rules," I said calmly. "This cabin is safe. I built it with my own hands, and it's mine. That's all there is to it." My words were deliberate, each one measured, carrying the weight of years spent dreaming, planning, and building in silence. She shifted her gaze to the other HOA members who had gathered, some clutching papers, some murmuring quietly. I could see their hesitation, the subtle cracks in their resolve. Authority, when wielded without understanding, falters when confronted by authenticity. And authenticity, I realized in that moment, is almost impossible to suppress. Then came the sound I hadn't expected: applause. A neighbor stepped forward, his hands clapping slowly, deliberately. Others joined in one by one until a quiet but undeniable wave of support rippled through the street. The HOA president froze, her mouth opening slightly in shock. She had expected compliance, fear, maybe even retreat, but not this. Not solidarity, not admiration, not quiet defiance validated by an entire community. One of the officers stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We've inspected the cabin. It's within regulations and it's safe. There's no lawful reason to remove it." His words were clear, factual, but the weight behind them carried a moral resonance. Justice, in its simplest form, was on my side. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, not from fear, but from relief and pride. Years of effort, sacrifice, and patience had brought me here. And now, against the judgment, the whispers, the threats, I was standing in a truth that no authority, no letter, no rules could erase. The HOA president's hands trembled slightly. Her voice had lost the sharp edge it carried before. I suppose there's little else we can do," she muttered, almost to herself. Her authority had been challenged, and she was realizing, finally, that rules cannot account for heart, determination, or the quiet strength of someone unwilling to be silenced. I took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. The cabin behind me, glowing softly in the evening light, was more than wood and screws. It was a testament of perseverance, of quiet defiance, of the kind of courage that doesn't announce itself with fanfare, but speaks in steady, unwavering action. The officers nodded to each other, a subtle signal that the confrontation was over. They hadn't needed to enforce anything. Their role had been to witness and support. And sometimes that is enough. Sometimes the presence of someone who believes in your right to stand tall is all the reinforcement you need. The neighbors lingered, their eyes softening, expressions shifting from curiosity to respect. Some nodded, some whispered quiet encouragement, but all were silent witnesses to what had just transpired. And I realized, with a quiet swell in my chest, that this wasn't just my victory. It was a ripple of courage that had touched an entire street. The HOA president lingered for a moment longer, her gaze meeting mine. I saw something in that look, acknowledgement, perhaps even a hint of understanding. The fight had been about control, about conformity, about fear of the unfamiliar. But in the end, courage and authenticity had shifted the balance. I closed the door of my cabin and leaned against it, feeling the solid warmth of the wood beneath my hand. The rain from the day had left a glistening sheen, a reminder of struggle, persistence, and eventual triumph. This moment, fragile and fleeting, was a reminder that standing up for what is yours is rarely easy, but it is always worth it. Sometimes the world challenges you not to break you, but to reveal the strength you didn't know you had. And in the quiet after confrontation, when judgment fades and the storm subsides, you realize that true victory isn't loud. It doesn't demand applause or recognition. It simply endures. I took a step back, letting the evening breeze wash over me. My cabin stood firm behind me, and for the first time I felt completely at peace. The battle had tested every ounce of patience, courage, and resolve I possessed, and I had met it without faltering. And that I knew was a victory that no letter, no rule, and no fear could ever take away. The morning sun spilled across the cabin, warm and golden, and for the first time since I had arrived, the world felt still. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp earth, a reminder of the rain that had tested my patience and resolve just days before. I stepped outside and took it all in. The driveway, the street, the quiet murmurs of neighbors now scattered but lingering in the distance. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. I ran my hand along the edge of the cabin, feeling the smooth wood, the sturdy walls I had built with my own hands. Every mark, every groove, every careful measurement spoke of effort, of perseverance, of belief. And now, standing here, I realized that the battle wasn't about the cabin at all. It had never been. It had been about claiming my right to exist on my own terms, to pursue a dream without fear, to show a community that courage can't be legislated, silenced, or ignored. The officers arrived once more casually with smiles that were both familiar and comforting. They didn't need to enforce anything. Their role had always been quiet support, a reminder that sometimes the world shows its better side when no one expects it. "Looks like you made it through," the older officer said softly, his eyes scanning the cabin with approval. "You stood your ground." I smiled, a slow, quiet release of everything that had built up over weeks of tension. "I had to," I replied simply. "There wasn't any other choice." And he nodded, understanding more than words could capture. The HOA president appeared one last time, lingering near the end of the street. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something softer in her posture, a subtle acknowledgement that her rules and authority could not suppress what had been proven here. Perhaps she saw now that the letters and fines, the threats and warnings, could never measure effort, heart, or resilience. Perhaps she realized that courage, once set in motion, is impossible to contain. Neighbors began to emerge again, this time with more openness, some offering tentative smiles, others nodding quietly in respect. The quiet solidarity, the acknowledgement of effort and perseverance, wrapped around me like a warm current, a shared understanding that sometimes the right choice is not the easiest one, but it is the one that matters most. I stepped back and looked at the cabin, its wheels settled on the gravel, its walls glowing in the morning light. It wasn't just a structure anymore. It was a testament, a monument to persistence, courage, and the quiet power of refusing to be silenced. And as I took it in, I felt a profound sense of pride, not just in what I had built, but in the person I had become while building it. The world had tested me with letters, stares, and threats. It had tried to make me doubt myself, to bend me to conformity, to silence my ambition. But I had endured. I had stood firm. I had met every challenge with patience, effort, and unwavering belief in the value of my own work. And in doing so, I had shown something far larger than a cabin on a gravel driveway, the strength of human resolve, the power of quiet courage, and the truth that integrity can outlast fear. The officers left with nods of acknowledgement, blending into the street like the quiet guardians they had been from the beginning. I watched them go, feeling a strange gratitude. Their presence had been a buffer, yes, but more importantly, it had mirrored back to me a reflection I needed to see. That courage, when witnessed even in part, becomes undeniable. The HOA president lingered a moment longer, then turned and walked away, clipboard in hand, her authority diminished not by confrontation but by the undeniable truth of what had been built here. And I realized, finally, that sometimes the greatest victories aren't loud or dramatic. They don't always require acknowledgement, applause, or enforcement. Sometimes they are quiet, stubborn, and profoundly human. I stepped back into my cabin, closing the door softly behind me. The walls held the scent of fresh wood, the warmth of effort, and the quiet certainty of accomplishment. Outside, the neighborhood resumed its routine, indifferent in appearance but forever changed in subtle ways by what had just transpired. And in that quiet, unassuming moment, I understood the deepest truth of all. Strength is not always loud. Courage does not always roar. Sometimes it simply stands unwavering against the weight of doubt, judgment, and fear, and in doing so, it inspires more than anyone could imagine. I sat down, feeling the weight of every nail hammered, every late night spent sanding, every moment of hope and fear converge into this simple, enduring victory. The cabin wasn't just mine. The journey, the resilience, the courage, it was mine, too. And in that ownership, I finally felt whole. Because sometimes, the battles you fight in silence leave the loudest echoes. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.